Welcome back. Time now for The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Now, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has now entered its third week. Well, since the invasion began on the 24th of February, the United Nations says 564 civilians, amongst them 41 children, have been killed. More than 1,000 civilians have been seriously injured, though the actual number of deaths and injuries could be much higher than that. 2.5 million people have been forced to flee Ukraine, 200,000 of them in the past 24 hours alone. Hundreds of thousands of people are trapped under heavy bombardment in cities and towns across Ukraine, and all the while, Russia has so far not achieved one of its stated objectives. And the number of Russian soldiers killed so far could be anywhere from Moscow's death toll of 500 to Ukraine's figure of more than 12,000. Well, today we're going to be looking at some of the key events on the ground during these last 7 days. We'll also look at the information war between the Kremlin's narrative and the rest of the world's version of events. Plus, we'll look at some of the main diplomatic developments. Well, to discuss these various topics, I'm joined by Nico Hines, the world editor of The Daily Beast, who joins us from the studio in London. Warm welcome to you. From Ukraine, we're very pleased to have back with us on France 24, Yevgeny Kiselov, who is a journalist and TV host on the television channel Ukraine 24. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us again. From Moscow, we're joined by Sergei Bantman, who is the deputy editor of Echo of Moscow. Now, that was an independent radio channel which was co-founded with Sergei Korzun in the 1990, but which last week was taken off the airwaves. Lots to talk about there. And last but not least, I'm here in the studio with Craig Kopidis, contributing editor to Courts. So welcome to all of you. Let us begin on the ground in Ukraine, where Russia has this week widened its military offensive. For the first time, Russian forces have now begun striking targets in the west of the country, but as well as bombarding new cities, Russia has continued its bombardment of Mariupol in the south and Sumy and Kharkiv to the east. Well, all of the deadly strikes carried out by Russia so far, of all of them, the maternity ward in Mariupol bombing earlier on this week has perhaps sparked the most international outrage, as well as charges of possible war crimes. Well, at least 3 people, including a child, were killed there in that maternity hospital in Mariupol. So let's talk about what's happening on the ground. And Craig, since you're here with us in this studio, let me just ask you a very basic question. At this early stage, although we're in our third week of this invasion, who's on top? Who's managing to get ahead, get the upper hand in this conflict?
No one's on top. There are no winners in a war. This war is being fought on 3 fronts, the most tragic of which is being fought in the Ukraine. And that's a war that's going to last quite some time. The second war, and I don't think this should be forgotten, is being fought in Russia by a lot of brave people who are fighting against a totalitarian regime, who are being arrested. And we can't forget about that war. The third war that's going on, and the one that infuriates me a bit too much, is the guerrilla war going on against both the Russians and the Ukrainians, which is being waged by the banks. The banks, Western banks, are owed over $120 billion by Russia. They want that money. And when you have a bank like Deutsche Bank, which came out today and said that it was problematic for them to stop doing business with Russia, well, you know what side they're on. So those are the 3 fronts. All 3 are equally ghoulish, but the central battle right now is obviously in Ukraine.
Thanks for that, Craig. Let's go to Ukraine and speak to Yevgeny. I just want to ask you, what's the significance of the new targets that have been struck by Russian forces in the last 24 hours, notably the town of Dnipro? I mean, are they trying to send out the message that nowhere is safe?
Yes, of course. That's the message Russian invaders are sending to the people of Ukraine. I will not agree with my colleague who spoke a minute ago. I did not hear his name. I'm sorry about that.
Craig Kopidis.
So I cannot agree with Craig in that part of his comments that no one is winning this war. I think Putin has already lost the war because he wanted to take over Ukraine in 3 days. And we all know that on the third day of this invasion, he was planning to take over Kyiv. And there were articles that accidentally appeared on government-sponsored internet sites in Russia that were already celebrating the great victory of Mr. Putin over Ukraine. These articles immediately disappeared because they were published by mistake. But you know, internet remembers everything. Well, the war is now into its third week. Kyiv hasn't been taken. Not a single big city, a city of million population, and there are several of them in Ukraine, did not surrender. And that's a victory for the Ukrainian people, no matter how long the war will go on, no matter. We shall all remember Ukrainian people fighting this war. This is, I think, this is the real war of independence that Ukraine is fighting 30 years after they proclaimed independence of the country. And on the other hand, Putin, in my opinion, has lost this war because he will always stay in history as a military criminal. I don't think there's now any serious difference between other military criminals of the past and Vladimir Putin at present. And let me say one last thing. I've been in Afghanistan in late 70s, early 80s. I did my army service there as a military translator, as a military interpreter. And, well, Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was a cruel thing. But even during that period, Soviet troops never attacked cities with rocket artillery and shell fire. There was atrocities that are taking place today can be compared only with the atrocities that took place during the Second World War in Europe.
Okay, well, thank you for giving a Ukrainian an extremely valid perspective on developments. Let's get the next most logical version of events from Moscow. I want to ask you, Sergei. I mean, what Yevgeny was just saying must sound completely alien to the average person in Moscow. What is the narrative on the progress in this so-called special operation, which we all know is an invasion?
You know, it's very difficult to work in Moscow because the first step of Putin power was to destroy professional journalism in Russia, and our radio is closed. It's very difficult to transmit anything. We're working. We started to work on YouTube, but it's very difficult to give facts to our public, to our audience, because we had several laws in Russia against real information. They want to give only the Putin facts and Ministry of Defense facts and information about the events in Ukraine and around Ukraine and in the world. They want us, all the Russian, to live in a very special, very awkward, and very fantastic world. The world of special operation, of some I don't know, some very brave and very noble Russian army acting in Ukraine, and the bad Ukrainian Nazi defending their power, and the poor Ukrainian people, which is against Ukrainian power. And it's a fantasy, pure fantasy. And for us, for example, it's only Novaya Gazeta newspaper is existing as professional journalism in the traditional media field. So it is no statistics. We don't have any statistic, any sociology facts, because it's the world of it's Putin world, and many people, too many people, I think, they're believing and drinking this propaganda from the TV stations, state TV channels.
Absolutely.
It's fantastic. I don't know where I'm living now.
Yeah, Sergei, I mean, I completely hear what you're saying. And in fact, we're going to do a whole segment on disinformation in this war. And we'll certainly be touching on some of those themes again. But let's go to Nico, who's been patiently waiting for us in London. And Nico, let me ask you what I asked Craig, which is, in your view, is the Russian side perhaps doing much less well in your view than perhaps they might have thought? And how are the Ukrainian military faring, in your opinion, at this stage?
Well, it certainly does seem as though Putin has lost the expectation management game, which, as we're familiar in news journalism and in politics, is always so important. You know, he kind of did appear to give the impression that they thought this war was going to be over very quickly. And there's no doubt that the Ukrainians have put up a fantastic, fierce fight using some of the weapons that were donated from the West, like the missiles that can blow up the tanks, which seem to be having a devastating impact on those rusty old Russian tanks which have rolled onto Ukrainian territory. I think Yevgeny is completely right talking from Ukraine when he says that that Putin has lost in many ways because he has not pulled this off in the way that he planned to. But I think what we have to be realistic about is the fact that, you know, wars can sometimes drag on. And if you look through the history books, you know, wars drag on for years. And it's possible that Putin will drag this war out for years and eventually, will make the weight of his vast, superior-sized army count. But what he hasn't been able to do is quickly and swiftly achieve his goals with minimum casualties. If Putin does carry this on, it's going to be at huge cost to himself and huge cost from the sanctions that have been put on him as the world sits around and potentially for months and months watches these absolutely awful atrocities carried out.
Okay, thanks there, Nico. We've gone round the table, so to speak, now. Everyone's had an opening gambit, so feel free from this point onwards to jump in. I'd like to raise a couple of points. I mean, the fact that Putin has today been inviting volunteers from the Middle East to join the fight in eastern Ukraine. He says there are 16,000 people from the Middle East, we assume from Syria, although I wonder whether perhaps the forces from Hezbollah might be also invited. Do we view that as a sign of desperation? Craig, your thoughts?
Well, I hope they like cold weather. It's a sign of desperation. It's a sign of the propaganda war that's been going on. You know, if I might, you know, Zhenya's correct. Putin's losing so far. But it's real important to realize we are all Ukraine right now, as the expression goes. But what Ukraine is really winning right now in the West is the television war, as it well should be, because they're on the right side. As Nico said, this war is going to last a long time, a very long time, unless something happens to Putin. And if I might, Tom, if I might ask a really important question, I would love to know from Seryoja what the status on the ground is with the protest movement. Is there any chance that it will reach a point where it could topple Putin in some sort of Aurora moment from back in the Bolshevik Revolution, where the military would side with the people, topple Putin, and bring some form of democratic government to Russia? I know I'm probably dreaming, but are we even anywhere close to that kind of moment?
Sergei, feel free to answer.
Yes, I don't know. Well, we need a Frodo Baggins to achieve his dream. Anything else? I don't know. It's very. This power was created, have been created for many years, and my friend Evgeny Kiselov knows very well how Vladimir Putin began to his special operation against freedom of speech. And it was Evgeny Kiselov's channel, TV channel, NTV, was destroyed the first, I think, in our country. For more than 20 years, Putin created his model. And I think this propaganda, while for example, Khodorkovsky process trial in 2003, or then the Georgian War, then Crimea and Donbass, and it was more and more powerful. But everything can happen, I think. And the futurology is very poor science because we don't know all the details, small details of our present, which can play their part in the future. I think everything is possible.
Yevgeny, do you think that there's a likelihood of 16,000 people from the Middle East suddenly taking part in this war and suddenly appearing on Ukrainian soil? Do you think that's a likely scenario?
Well, many people assert that this war will never start. I've been talking to many people during the period before the war, probably every program that I presented on my channel on Ukraine 24 dealt with the prospect of a Russian offensive. And almost every expert who appeared on my program would say, look, this is not rational. Putin will not start a war that would hit the whole of Ukrainian territory. Putin will not attack Kyiv or other big cities, and they would give a lot of reason for that. But Putin started to act against reason, against rationale. He's a madman. He's losing hundreds of soldiers every day. Just look at the videos that are distributed by the Ukrainian side. Well, you can argue about the figures, but the pictures, the videos that you can easily find at different Ukrainian sources, well, they're bona fide. You can't argue with that. Blown up armored vehicles, blown up tanks, blown up infantry carriers, country roads that are full of bodies, full of that scrap that remains from the blown up tanks and armored personnel carriers. And he continues this offensive that would leave many more thousands of Russian soldiers there in the snowy fields of Ukraine. And by the way, well, I don't know, if he invites mercenaries from Syria, I don't know, Hezbollah, Hamas, whatever, well, I don't think they will survive the weather, today's weather in Ukraine is very bad for those who are on the offensive, because they lack supplies, they lack hot food, they lack places, they lack places to rest and heat up.
Absolutely. Okay, we've got to move on. I just want to ask, before we change the theme, I just want to ask Nico a question and just ask, I mean, your thoughts, just sort of as we wrap up this on the ground section of our discussion. I mean, do you think that the world, I mean, Ukraine's allies, have done as much as they can up until this point in terms of military aid, military support, as much as they can without overstepping that mark that might be seen as a provocation too far and then kicking off a full-on confrontation with Russia? Have we done as much as we can?
Well, I would say the answer to that is obviously no. There was this deal seemingly done to allow these MiG fighters from Poland to be shipped over into Ukraine, and we don't quite know what reason behind the scenes that was eventually kiboshed. But it's obvious that that's what Ukraine needs in order to be able to put up a fight in the air. They're doing a fantastic job with some surface-to-air missiles. They're doing a fantastic job with tanks on the ground. But what we haven't really seen yet, and what could potentially prove decisive in this war, is reams and reams of Russian bomber jets flying over Ukraine and absolutely flattening Kyiv or other cities in the country. And the Ukrainian forces are not really well enough equipped to deal with that, especially if they continue to degrade the surface-to-air missiles that they do have in Ukraine. So that's one area where the West has obviously fallen short. But I do think they've done a fairly good job. They've probably done a better job in terms of sanctions than I think any of us really expected, and that is really starting to bite. So that's putting Putin under a huge amount of pressure. And I think you see from, this mercenary story is a good example of the way, Yevgeny described Putin as a madman, and certainly there are crazed aspects to what he's doing here. But he's also got this kind of slightly warped but strategic mind that he's thinking, okay, so 20,000 people have supposedly volunteered to come and fight for Ukraine from all over the world, from the US, from Britain, from France, people coming who are Ukrainian diaspora, rushing home to defend their homeland. That makes it sound like they must be the good guys. So he's come up with this story of these supposed volunteers from Syria who are coming to Russia's defense to try and balance out that story. So I think he's very aware of how this war is playing, and he will be determined to try and change these narratives around. He's not done yet.
Okay, thanks, Nico. We're going to turn the page now. The Kremlin's reaction to the news of the bombing of that maternity hospital in Mariupol has been aggressive denial. They say it's fake news and that the hospital didn't house any patients. Instead, it was a base being used by neo-Nazis. Well, Russia's first deputy permanent representative to the UN went a step further, saying that the pregnant women seen amidst the rubble in the media photographs were, in fact, Ukrainian models and actresses. Well, here's what Dmitry Polyansky told the United Nations.
Her name is Mariana Podurska. She plays 3 pregnant women all at the same time, differently made up.
И она встречается и на других снимках одного и того же фотографа, Евгения Малолетки, который живописует.
Okay, so Russia there saying it's a staged scene. Now, a country we don't often hear from is Albania. And Albania told that same UN meeting that Russia is ultimately going to pay for its crimes with respect to specifically that incident in Mariupol. Let's listen to what Albania said.
Now a scorched earth, the face of the Russian aggression. Yesterday, the most vulnerable and defenseless people, pregnant women with their newborns, might have believed that they were in one of the most secure places you can imagine, a hospital, where you go to heal, where you are taken care of. They weren't. Russian bombs found them in a deliberate attack. This is a crime which should not remain unpunished.
Okay, the Albanian representative at the UN speaking there, saying Russia's going to pay for its crimes. Let's go to Russia, and I'd like to ask Sergei. Just as with the Syrian conflict, Kremlin-friendly trolls are out there. I've encountered them myself, and they seek to confuse and sow seeds of division. Are they having an effect, would you say? Are they managing to twist the narrative in the way that the Kremlin would like them to?
Oh, you know, it's very usual Russian Putin politics, because to create events, to create the cause of the event, and I think it's a very Soviet Stalin times manner to manage information. When I heard, for example, in Syria is almost like Afghanistan, and some other campaigns, and just training for creating for something more serious. I think and information too, and for example. Before the events, before the invasion in Ukraine, there were some, for example, some bombing, blastings, terrorist acts, some obviously false in Donbass. And it was for example, before the war in Finland, in 1939, it was the same, the Manila station, or, for example, it's before the war in Poland, this Glavitz history orchestrated and created by Germany. And then it is very, for example, Stalin always accused everybody in his own crimes, and his own manners to manage and create information. For example, when in Stalin's Soviet Union, they said, it's a lie, you give us lies, and to describe these lies, and because Stalin and his government they knew how to create fake news, and they accused everybody else to create fake news in Stalin's manner. I think Putin and Putin government makes the same thing. Yeah, I think everybody knows the story of the crucified boy in Donbass. I think it's a sign, it's a banner of Russian actual propaganda.
Yeah, and Craig, we were talking about this earlier. I mean, it's getting a little bit transparent, isn't it? We're getting a bit used to this kind of technique. We've seen lots of it. False footage, old or manipulated photographs, then debunked by the Kremlin saying, you see, the West is dishing up fake media, fake news, which in fact we never dished up at all. And it's got a special name, hasn't it? Pokazuka.
Pokazuka. Look.
Pokazuka.
Это Pokazuka. Look. Propaganda is a monologue which seeks not a response, but an echo. And I always get nervous about participating in that echo chamber. But I'm going to break my rule, because the most insidious part of Putin's propaganda is how he's used Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church and his 90 million followers to be his co-conspirator in this propaganda campaign and get 90 million Russian faithful behind this war. I've been listening to Patriarch Kirill's sermons for the past 2 weeks. As Nico can well tell you, we've been translating them, or I've been doing my best. And they're vitriolic, they're frightening. And so what you're seeing in Russia, in my opinion, actually goes beyond propaganda. Putin has managed to tap in to the spiritual soul of the Russian people, which I had the good fortune to live there and report from there for 10 years. I think I know it. I think I do. And that's what he's tapped into, and that's the insidious part of this. He's created, and if, for our viewers who don't understand this, I advise you to go out and get this book. You need to read a book called The Heart of a Dog by Mikhail Bulgakov. That's what Putin's done. In this book, a professor removes the testicles of an apparatchik, essentially, and he puts them in to a nice little puppy. And in the stage player of the film, I think it was both, not in the book, there's a line where the professor says, as this Putin dog is going, man, oh my God, look what I've done. I've turned a perfectly nice little dog into a son of a bitch. And that, if Bulgakov was here right now, I think he would agree with me. And that's the insidious part. They've let the church participate in this.
Yeah, they're clearly complicit. Sorry, did Yevgeny want to jump in?
Yes, I have only one comment on what Craig has just said. The testicles belong to an old drunkard,
Yeah,
they combined this nice puppy with a drunkard. And that's what came out of it.
Can I just pick up with something with you, Yevgeny? Actually, just moving away from dogs and back to the purpose of all of this is clearly to confuse and divide, and it's also these kind of false narratives coming out of the Kremlin are also there to chip away at morale in Ukraine. Are you noticing any of these efforts having any effect?
Oh no, by no means. Majority of Ukrainian population does not view Russian channels. They do not believe and they do not trust Russian media at all. I have difficulty sometimes to invite liberal Russian journalists or liberal Russian experts on my program, because there's a very distrustful attitude on the part of majority of Ukrainian viewers. I have to introduce every guest with Russian background and explain that this is a good guy. Dear viewers, you have to trust my word, trust this man. He knows what he's saying. He has a long history of opposition to Putin's regime, and only after such introductory remarks, such disclaimers, people start to listen to what a Russian person says. Distrust of Russia now is turning to hate of Russia, unfortunately. And I think Russia and Ukraine will be enemies for many decades, and Russians will be considered enemies, and they would not like to deal with Russia, like people who were living in the former Soviet Union during and after the Second World War. They had the same negative attitudes to almost everyone who was just speaking German. Germans started to be trusted in a different way, and Sergei will probably confirm that Germans will. We started to have a nice relationship to Germans only probably in the 70s or the 80s.
Yeah, Sergei, it's only fair that I let you jump in, bearing in mind we've got less than 10 minutes to go. How do you respond to what Yevgeny's just said? Sergei, I don't know if you can hear us. How do you respond to Yevgeny's comments there about how Russians are perceived?
I would like to answer because I think it's an epic tragedy for us, for all of us, because I don't know. I have a cousin, a dear cousin, in Nikolaev, where I'm writing every morning to my cousin, how are you? Are you alive? And she's writing to me, and she says, Echo Moscow, our radio. It's the only detail that proves that in Russia there are normal people. I think it is epic tragedy because young Russian soldiers are my neighbors, are children of my friends, of Muscovites from St. Petersburg and everywhere in Russia. Perhaps I knew them children. And in Ukraine, that I love, I visited, and even after Crimea, I used to teach in Kyiv for young journalists. And when I imagine all these people fighting against each other, it's awful, it's a tragedy. And my country started this tragedy. My country, Russia, started. It's I think it's unbearable. For the moment,
Okay.
it's unbearable for 1 or 2 generations.
Okay, so there's going to be some long-lasting scars. We're going to move on in just a moment. Just before we do, I'd like to ask Nico, I don't know if you saw the one of the fake news narratives put out on social media with these body bags that were laid out behind a reporter, and one of the body bags started moving. I believe we've got pictures of that. I just wondered whether you'd seen that and what you thought the purpose of it was, and whether it had an effect perhaps on muddying the waters, confusing people looking on the conflict in Ukraine. What were your thoughts, Nico?
Yeah, I think we can be a bit too quick to say, oh, everybody knows that these Putin or Kremlin propaganda moves are so transparent, nobody believes them. Well, a lot of people do believe them. You know, there's a huge number of people in Russia who seem to be believing the official line coming out of the Kremlin, and why wouldn't they? That's what they're being told. But it's not just the Russians who fall for these things. You know, we've been following the news in the United States, for example, or in Europe over recent years, and every time something is thought to be proven, someone pops up with a theory. Oh, actually, this is crisis actors. Oh, actually, this is fake. Oh, it was all staged. So I don't think it's as straightforward as we're making out here. And I think, what is beholden upon us as journalists, rather than just saying, oh, hey, that's obviously nonsense, anyone who buys it's an idiot, what we need to do is we need to show why it's not true. If you look at the Daily Beast, we've just put up a story in the last hour. We've got hold of the family of one of those women who was injured in the bombing of the maternity ward in Mariupol. Yesterday, the Russian embassy in London claimed that she was a crisis actor. We ran a story yesterday showing that she was actually a beauty blogger. And then today we've interviewed her aunt, and there's some good news that the baby has been born, and it's a girl called Veronica. I think our role can be to show that these things aren't true, rather than to just tell people that they're not true.
Okay,
I'd just like to quickly say on this propaganda thing, Sergei, I think, is a great example of someone who, Echo of Moscow, such an incredible institution. We've quoted it many times at the Daily Beast because they have been a true voice in the storm over there. And for him to even come on this show is taking a risk. And for people like Sergei and many, many others in Russia who are standing up and telling the truth despite risks to their own lives, they could be jailed for these things. Respect to that, and hopefully those voices will continue to grow rather than all being shut down.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, we've got just a couple of minutes left before we have to move on and close the programme. But I just want to turn the page and move on to diplomacy. Turkey, of course, which has a maritime border with Russia and Ukraine and the Black Sea, managed to maintain good ties with both countries. And this week in the city of Antalya, we've seen a lot of diplomacy aimed at trying to broker a solution to the crisis. But Thursday's talks between the Russian foreign minister and his Ukrainian counterpart made no apparent progress towards a ceasefire. Well, addressing that forum in Antalya today, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said that diplomacy is the only solution.
The senseless conflict in Ukraine is causing death and devastation to the country and its people, with enormous security risks for the region and the world. It has forced more than 1.5 million people across borders and disrupted the global economy with unforeseeable consequences. It has multiplied the danger of miscalculation and escalation. There is only one way forward, the path of dialogue and diplomacy.
This guy. Geez.
Okay, well, diplomacy is the only solution, says the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. Let's get a Ukrainian perspective on that. Yevgeny, is diplomacy the only solution?
Well, I think it's a collapse of diplomacy. You know, where we collapse. United Nations is turning to the powerless organization that can't do.
Okay, we've got a bit of an audio issue there. We've got very little time left, Yevgeny. Sorry, we're going to have to leave that and ask someone else. Craig, let me ask you for your thoughts. Is diplomacy the solution, or is it going to be more on the battlefield?
No, because the Ukrainian people rightly will never agree with any of Putin's demands because he wants to control the country. The Ukrainians are going to fight. This diplomacy going on right now, again, it fits into the television war. Pay no attention to it.
Nico, is this wishful thinking, would you say, by the head of the UN, diplomacy being the only solution?
Well, look, ultimately, there's going to be some sort of a deal. We don't know if it's going to be relatively recent. I agree with Craig that the Ukrainians are going to keep fighting. I don't think they're going to kowtow to Moscow's demands anytime soon. But what we do know from history is that every war eventually ends up in some sort of truce and ceasefire. It's just a question of when that takes place and how strong either side is at the time. What we've got to hope is that Kyiv is still standing, that Zelensky is there to fight back when that deal is eventually done.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. I'm so sorry, we're out of time. Nico Hines, the world editor of the Daily Beast, you've had the last word. Thank you very much indeed to Yevgeny Kiselyov, a journalist and TV host on Ukraine 24. Thank you as well to Sergei Bantman, deputy editor of Echo of Moscow Radio. And thank you to you as well. Craig Kopitas, contributing editor of Quartz. Thank you so much.
Udachi, Seryoja. Udachi.
That was The World This Week. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.